my name is May. I am a small batch ceramic artist working under the handle Mayramics. I have been working with clay as a medium for about 4 years now, so I thought I'd do a little video and share what my journey's been, which might be helpful to some people. I have a puppy in my lap because she refuses to leave. And I'm also reading a couple of notes of my laptop as well. So if I am looking another way, it is probably the nerves or just trying to figure out where my brain should be. So how I got into ceramics. I got into ceramics during a period of my life where I was just doing things for me. I had enrolled myself in an Italian class to learn the language. I was just basically trying to do as many things that I hadn't tried before or go back to things that I'd tried before, like learning a language, to try and see what kind of sparked joy. I did a little bit of ceramics in primary school, high school, nothing major, but it was just more like, you know, an art class here or there where we'd make a figurine or we made this little flower wall decor back when I was in primary school. So I'd always had fond memories of ceramics growing up, even though I never really had done a course or anything. I was in my mid-20s where everyone was either getting married or going on holidays and traveling, and I was at that stage where I was trying to find something for me. I enrolled into the wheelwork course at TAFE, which was a short course that went over for about 6 weeks. And I had actually been trying to get into that course over a series of months, but just never managed to get myself enrolled within the cutoff dates. They just weren't as obvious on their websites now. I think they're a little bit more obvious now. But when I finally did get into it, I was so stoked. It was just something that I'd been looking forward to, but just never managed to get into. So I basically spent about a year doing short courses. There's 4 short courses, I think, over a year. I was learning through teachers there, but also through YouTube videos as well. So I was spending kind of a lot of my time sitting on my hands in between courses, which I didn't find very helpful, just because clay is one of those things where you really need to practice what you're doing. Being able to understand how clay moves or to train your muscles to work in a certain way is a big thing to pottery, especially if you're wheel throwing. Being able to train those muscles so that you can actually handle the clay or handle the amount of centering that you need to do. The long breaks in between when I was at TAFE just wasn't really helping me, but after the first course I was hooked. So I actually bought a bag of clay to do at home, to do a little bit of hand building. That's something I'll talk about later, just because I feel like it ties in with pottery safety, which is something that people do talk about, but people don't necessarily know when they first start pottery. I found that TAFE was really good, but just with the surge in pottery and how popular it's been, there's so many other options out there now, like attending local pottery studios where they run classes. And some of those classes are also a lot more frequent than what they would have held at TAFE. So I feel like if you're out there looking for something, TAFE is an option, but there's also other like local studios and stuff that you could go to as well. So where do I do pottery? So after realizing that pottery was probably going to be a longer term hobby for me, I signed myself up to a local pottery studio. So I go there to work most of the days during the evenings, and as well as the weekends to practice my craft as much as possible, basically. I have made some really good friends there actually, so I'd highly recommend signing up to a local studio if you haven't already. I still remember my first day going there though, and it was so daunting. I had no idea where any of the equipment was. I wasn't signed up to a class. I knew the basics of wheel throwing, so I could do it if I had the equipment that I needed. But at that point in time, I just wanted to practice as much as possible. So it was a little bit daunting, but once I figured out where everything was, also made a couple of friends, it was just really easy to go there. After a few years of doing pottery, I work out of my home studio, which basically consists of a shelf of all my pottery things, and my desk back here and a lot of buckets. That's probably a video for another day, how I actually work out of my home studio. I can actually do everything except fire here. At the studio, basically the same thing, but having a studio at home basically gives me a little bit more flexibility in terms of what I want to do. It also means it's a bit easier for me to check on the status of my clay and how it's drying. So it gives me a little bit more control without having to travel to the studio. So after attending a studio and being able to watch other people and how they clean and you know what practices they've implemented into the studio, I feel like that was really important for me to learn what to do at home, which was not something that I knew how to do when I first bought that bag of clay to hand build at home after the course. So is doing pottery safe? Yes, if you follow the right procedures. Otherwise you risk getting silicosis, you risk also potentially clogging your water pipes. That's another thing as well. If you don't dispose of your clay water properly and just pour it down your drains, you just risk clogging that up when all the clay settles. So here I have a bucket of clay water which I use to throw. So you can see that I've used two different types of clay here. So one's more of this cream color and there's one that's more white. So this water here, now that I've kind of agitated it a little bit, this was clear before. And that would be okay to pour down your drain or whatever. I usually pour it with my plants, just pour it in my plants just to be safe. But basically, when it's cloudy like this, there is clay in it. And when it sits in your pipes, it will settle in your pipes. So you kind of want to avoid that as much as possible, especially if you're doing that and operating out of your home. So after you throw, usually this is all mixed. So if I give this a bit of a swirl, you can kind of see all those particles at the bottom moving around. And if you just swirl this enough, all of this would just be clay water. And that's something that you don't want to pour down your pipes. You don't want that basically sitting in there, settling like that. That's just a recipe for disaster and also a very expensive mistake. So you want to be able to wipe your surfaces properly if you're operating at a home. When I bought that bag of clay after my first course to do hand building at home, I was actually hand building in my bedroom. And I had carpet there, which is a big no-no because you can't really vacuum up clay. From my experience anyway, I don't really have experience with any like HEPA vacuums or anything. I'm guessing you kind of risk still having clay dust kind of spurt out when you vacuum it up. So after I realized that, I packed it all up and basically did not operate out of that room until I moved, where my current setup at home is now with tile. So I can wipe down the floors if I need to. I can wipe down my desk, wipe down anything that needs to be cleaned, just to make sure that it's safe. There's several other risks that come with pottery as well. So if you mix your own glazes, you want to make sure you're wearing the dust masks that are appropriate with the Australian standards. Not sure how that translates if you're operating elsewhere. I just found that working in a local studio meant that I could pick up these safety practices from the studio and also from the people who are working in the studio as well. So learning good habits from the start is a really important thing. For me, I personally always make sure I wipe down all my surfaces after I work. I never leave it to just sit there because I don't want the clay particles to get airborne, and I always clean my wheel entirely. I've seen a lot of people with reels where they just have a lot of crusty clay sitting in their splash pan. Rosie's just having a scratch over there. Yeah, there's just clay in the splash pan. It's all dried. And look, I don't know their situation, whether or not it's just very ventilated or anything, but I just would not want to run the risk of having that clay dust get agitated when I move it. Unless you're like wetting it and then moving it out, potentially that's okay because then the water traps all the particles, but I just wouldn't run the risk. Clean it every time is what I'd recommend, is what I do myself just to make sure that I stay safe as well, and that it just doesn't fly around in my home. Making sure that you have a clean workspace to work from is honestly like the top priority when it comes to pottery. It's an art that I really love, and I've done it for so many years and I want to do it for many more years after. So for me, trying to make sure that I do as little irreversible damage to my body is the most important thing for me. What was the most difficult thing for me to learn? So that would be throwing, centering, and probably trimming. So basically the whole process. I think once you kind of understand that whole process and how to do it, you're okay. But that whole starting process of trying to learn it, very, very difficult. So this is an example of the first bowl that I trimmed. It was not a bowl that I threw because the instructor did that for me because I was terrible, absolutely terrible. But as you can see, it's very uneven. You can see that there's a whole bunch of, you know, marks here and there. It's just not even. This is just a not great disaster. You can see all these like lumps and bumps. Yeah, I've come a long way since then. I can tell myself that. So when did I start selling my stuff? So I didn't start selling my stuff until a year and a half after I started, and even then I was only selling to friends and family. So no markets, no nothing. It was just me really starting out with the people that I knew, which was a nice start, but like a very daunting start at the same time. It was probably about the 2-year mark when I started selling online. And even then I was being very selective with the pieces that I actually put online and making sure that I was actually happy with the product that I was putting out there. I started with Big Cartel and I moved over to Etsy this year. So I'll put a link down below to my online store if you want to check it out. I also sell at markets as well. So I don't do a lot of markets during the year just because I also have a full-time job, but I do the markets that my local studio does run, and I attend those, which are about twice a year. I definitely want to explore the idea of markets a little bit more over the next course of the year. It's great doing it in the local studio regardless, just because there's a lot less pressure and there's a lot of people that I know there. So before I wrap up, if you are located in Perth, Western Australia, I have a market coming up on 18th June at Claymake Studio in Maylands. You can find out more information on my Instagram page for more updates and little sneak peeks of who else is also going to be there. So if you are interested, I hope to see you there. Bye!